Right, so welcome everyone to the Access Funding Workshop. I'm Nick from Rounders England. And like I've just said, everything is going to be recorded from that point, and I will pass you on to Janet for an intro.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Nick. You've just met Nick from the Yorkshire Leagues, and also she has a role with Rounders England on the talent team. You've met Rianne as well, the development director of Rounders England, who's going to be operating the comments, etc. So if you've got anything that you might want to sort of discuss later, if you pop that into the comments box, and we'll get all that recorded for you. Joining us on the workshop today as well is Michelle Grimes. Now, Michelle, on one of her many jobs, works for a fundraising company called Funding for Clubs, and they're very successful at what they do. So she's here today to give tips on how to go about applying for funding, etc., etc. And also, if you want to contact Michelle, phone number and email address will be in the comment box for you to access later. Okay, so we're going to have a question and answer later on at the end of the session, where we're going to ask you to think about what needs you have as a club or as a league or as a project. So when you think about funding, it's thinking about what needs, what do you want that funding for? What is it that you desperately need in your area that the funders will hopefully pay for? And then also what we want you to think about is what help will you need? Now we're going to ask you to answer that question at the end, because during this workshop, if we cover some of the things, you may not need that help at the end. You might think, all right, I've got my head around that now, I know what I'm doing. So just the two things that we want you to think about as we go through is what needs does your project have or your club have, and what help do you need to be able to access the funding to get what you need. All right, so like I said, we'll come back to that at the end. There's quite a bit to get through, so we'll just shuffle on as we go. Remember, use the comment box, please, if you've got any questions, so that we can, when we get to the question and answer, we can go through all those as well. So I'm going to pass you on now to Michelle, and she will go through her part of the workshop, which is really informative stuff, and then you'll come back to me later on in the workshop. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Janet.
Thanks for the intro. And I've just noticed it said expert Michelle Grimes on this slide, so there's no pressure whatsoever on me there, is there? Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about funding, just as a bit of background. I work in the sport and physical activity sector. I have done for too long, I'm not going to say how many years, and I've worked with Janet for about 20 odd years, so that gives you an indication how old I am. Let's move swiftly on. So yeah, at the minute, obviously Sport England have opened up the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Fund. Now, if anybody's familiar with the old Sport England small grants, this is more or less replacing that. Previous to that, the only things that have been around for the last 12, 18 months are probably the return to play and anything COVID related. So this is a real opportunity for clubs, groups to start getting funding again from Sport England. Very similar in cost-wise, anything up to £10,000 is available for individual projects. It's looking at bringing communities together, working with partners, getting people that are inactive, active, and people that are probably a little bit active, a bit more active. So it's a really broad spectrum, to be honest. So anything that's encouraging that movement and physical activity is something that this funding would cover. It does mention around working with people in the high areas of deprivation, in the IMD 1 to 3. And if you're not sure about that, it is on the website. You can check by postcode. And even though it does mention that Sport England will fund projects outside of these areas, it's just that they have to do some kind of focus on those inequalities. So please don't be put off. And also you may be in an area that's a little bit more affluent, but will have deprivation issues. And obviously areas of affluency also have problems, so it's not that you can't apply. So please do look at that and have a look at the form. It's all on the website. If you don't know where it is, we can put it in the chat later. So that's currently on offer, and I would advise people to have a look at that. If you're doing it yourself, just have a look at it, look at the guidance and see if it fits what you want to do. Next slide, please, Nick. Rihanna, so whoever's moving it on. So yeah, what I'd suggest you're doing, if you're a club or a group looking at funding, I call it horizon scanning. It sounds a bit posh, but it probably means Google search. So if you look at things nationally, obviously we have Sport England funds, which are there and everybody knows about them, and it's probably the go-to for most sports clubs, which is the natural place to go. It is oversubscribed, it always has been, and it always will be. And I would probably say now, with things coming out of COVID and it's the first thing that's been available, that £5 million won't go very far. It might sound a lot, but it isn't. So, you know, you just got to bear that in mind when you're looking at funding. And I always say to sports clubs, start looking at other things like the National Lottery, Comic Relief, Sports Relief, things like that, the Community Fund, simply because you will get funding from these places, but not just for the sport's sake. Now, we're all in this room now, we all understand that playing rounders and playing any other sport, obviously it has other impacts. So isolation, mental well-being, and all that sort of stuff that, you know, team building skills and all the things that come out of playing sport. So you can apply for other pots of funding that might target those things, but obviously use sport as a vehicle to do it. So it is worth looking at other things. And just putting your eye across things. It might be something that really shouts out. If you do a lot of work with young people and get, you know, building them skills for employment, there might be some funding out there that's worth looking at. Just linking that back to my day job, I work for a sports organisation, and the two biggest projects we have are European social funded, and they're employment projects, but we use sport and physical activity as a way of engaging with people to build up skills that get them into employment. So don't always look at it from that, you know, that participation sports point of view. There is a lot linked to COVID recovery at the minute. I know that is changing, but there is still a lot of that about. So if you are struggling with COVID or getting back to, you've lost people or whatever, still I'll look at those COVID return to play stuff as well. Partnership approach comes across in more or less every bit of funding these days. People do not want to fund things that are just in silo, but don't be put off by that. It doesn't mean that you've got to have this massive formal partnership. It just means that you're linking in with other people, talking to people. And at the end of the day, you probably link in to Rounders England all the time. So put that down as your partner. So don't be put off by that yourself. Help yourself is another big thing. Sport England in particular are now really keen on Sports Club not looking at them as a bank. You can't keep going to them asking for the same thing. They want you to develop. They want you to be business minded. So they at the minute have something linked to Crowdfunder, which is called Active Together. So if you basically raise £5,000, they will match it. But they do help you on that process, you know, develop websites, look at how you raise that money. So that is something else to look at. Just on a national front as well, any kind of mass event. So for example, if I don't think there is anybody on the call, but if you're from Birmingham or that area for the Commonwealth, there will be pots of money linked to that. And I'm up in Lancashire. We have the Rugby League World Cup, and again there'll be bits of money around that. So it's always worth looking at those bigger events in your area. Just on this slide here, it was mentioned those will actually click onto places where you can put searches in, which narrow it down a little bit for you. A lot of them are national, but they might bring up some more local stuff. Next slide, if you don't mind, please. I feel like Boris. And again, local is really important, particularly because the national thing is probably oversubscribed. It is well worth looking at local supermarkets, businesses, banks. They will often have community champions. A lot of them are linked to their social responsibility policies. Technically, they won't be massive amount of money. You might get a couple of thousand here and there, but that couple of thousand can make a massive difference to clubs. So it is really worth doing. Something that's big across the country at the minute is social prescribing. If you don't know what that is, in a nutshell, I'm not an expert, but it's basically things that GPs and other healthcare workers can direct people to help them with their health, mental health, and things like that, which doesn't involve medicine. And sometimes there's funding available for that. And obviously the sport and movement and thing it fits in with that. I know in Lancashire, again, that's something that we do heavily. Contact your active partnership. I think there's going to be some work around that after this, but they will hold the Together Fund, which used to be the Tackling Inequalities Fund. It's normally around up to £5,000, targeted groups that are normally inactive, such as women and girls, disability sport, people from different backgrounds. Just contact them. They'll give you some conversations around that. They all do it differently, so I can't comment on each individual one. And also locally, it's not always about you getting the funding yourself. There'll be football community trusts, leisure trusts around that might have projects to deliver, but need people to deliver. And they might pay you then to deliver that on their behalf and obviously help them deliver their outcomes for their funding. So it's always worth talking to people, your local leisure trust is probably your first point of call and your active partnership, just to have a chat with them, and they might point you in the direction of other partners that might need your help. That's me done for that bit.
Okay. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about these things, what you'll need. So a steering group, a constitution, clear aims and admin. So I'm just going to go through each one of these sections. So a steering group, this is going to be the group that has time, basically, and passion and drive to keep your little project on track. And that would be part of your committee. So as long as they're passionate about Rounders and willing to have that spare time to support the cause, then that's your committee, your group of people. And that group of people will be mentioned in your constitution. So this document will just have all the fundamentals of your club, your project, your league in one document. Now, Rianne is going to pop a link in the chat to our template on Rounders England. It's just a basic constitution. You will need that when you apply for some pots of funding, so that your aims and how you collect finances, how you're going to be sustainable for the future, how decisions are going to be made, is all in that one document. If you need help with a constitution or want any of us to look at your constitution, there is some contact emails at the end, and we are happy to look at and review that document. Within your constitution, I mentioned aims. So these aims would be what you want to achieve in the future. And we have some aims already on there for you: promoting Rounders as a sport, fair and equal opportunities and treatment. There could be other aims in terms of, like what Michelle mentioned about employability, about education. It might be for those with disabilities. It might be tackling young people. So if you make it clear within that document in the aims section, that would be great, and obviously match the funding criteria. So if you're going for a pot of funding that is for young people, that the aim, it's obvious that, you know, your project is for young people. And a bank account. You will need a bank account. No funding or grant will ever go to a personal bank account, so it will need to be a business bank account. Just a few top tips, because I don't know what bank accounts you all use. I mean, do we have bank accounts? Has anyone got a club or a project with an account already?
Yeah, so we've got a bank account. We've had that for quite some time.
Is that
quite a few years?
Is that a business one?
Yeah, it's a business one. So I think it was non-profitable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few business bank accounts that will allow fee-free. So it's like a sole trader, non-profit type of account, and you can set them up really, really easily and online without even walking into a bank. However, what I would say is that some of the bigger funding pots will not allow you to have a business bank account without multiple signatories on. So Michelle will talk a little bit more about that. So what kind of bank account would you need to get, Michelle?
Yeah, you can normally set up a 3 community or business account as long as you're non-for-profit, which your constitution would prove. We've had this discussion just before this meeting. Ideally, I would personally say you'd need at least 2 people on your signatures for the bank account, although we pretty much know that's a bit irrelevant if you're doing online banking, but I still think for safeguarding of yourself and of the money, you're better off having 2 or 3 people as signatures that keep their eye on that account. It just prevents any issues going forward. And I am fairly sure that most funding providers would want a minimum of 2. And they do expect it to be unrelated people as well. So people not at the same address, not related by, you know, a blood or marriage or anything like that. Again, it just keeps everything quite simple if there's any kind of issues with money. So for your own best practice, really, I would suggest a couple of people are on that bank account.
Yep. And obviously, when it comes to spending any money that you are given, you must keep records. A lot of these funding providers will then want to know exactly what you've spent it on. So they'll want to see receipts, and they will also want to see impact, like how that money has achieved your aims. So for example, if I was to put in for a pot of money to say that I want to get people fit and active and increase members, they'll say, right, well, how many members have you got now? And then I'd have to prove how many members I have had after that funding, so post funding, so that they can prove that they've made an impact. So what I would do is make sure that whatever you do, you're keeping receipts, logs, records, player quotes, photos, anything like that would support and help them build a case study and obviously prove where that money's gone. So how to write an effective bid.
That's me, is it? Yeah, I've just put a few points down here. Some of them might sound obvious, but I like to remind myself of these things quite often because it's quite easily just to run away with trying to get an idea down and not actually looking. So something I always say is do the basics brilliantly. That being that make sure that you're eligible to apply. Sometimes they have limits on how much you can apply depending on the setup of your group, who you're working with. Those funding outcomes, make sure look at them, make sure you meet them. And I would put in any narrative in your bids. So if it's about building up, you know, confidence and things like that, then put that as part of your bid so that they can easily see that you're meeting their outcomes, make it easy for them. Break down your budget as much as possible. On a lot of Sport England bids that I've worked on, sometimes we've lumped equipment in and put £1,000 and they've come back and said, well, what exactly are you spending that on? So be as detailed as you can. And something Nick had mentioned earlier is that you can sometimes screenshot shopping baskets from the Rounders England shop and put that onto your bids so people can see where you've got that breakdown. So it doesn't look like you've just come up with something. Just make use of uploads and plans, particularly if there's a word counts, which a lot of people have word counts now, which 500 words sounds a lot, but once you get talking about something that you're quite passionate about, it can easily go. So sometimes pictures and little things like that just help you explain what you're trying to say. I've always said to people, build up a relationship with the funder. Two things really, obviously just maybe a phone call or an email saying, oh, I'm thinking about applying, this is our idea. Firstly, it might save some time if they turn around and say, no, it's not what we're looking for. And secondly, it just shows them that you've done your groundwork, you're looking into it and you're serious about what you're doing. And it also just puts you on their radar. So if you spoke to somebody about something, then it comes up at a panel meeting, for example, and they say, oh, they rang me and asked me about this. It can't do you any harm. And something that I also always a big believer in is particularly look at smaller bids first. If there's a funding opportunity for £250,000 and you want to go for it and you've got no history of bids or project delivery, then you're very unlikely to get it. Whereas if you've done maybe a couple of 10,000 bids for Sport England and then you up it a bit and say, like, we want to do this for £50,000, they're more likely to look at you. So it's all about building that up. So even these little small pots of funding, do it well, report on it, and then you've got that funding history, which stands you in good stead when people look at you. Just want to move it down a little bit for me. Yeah, are you answering the questions? I do this a lot. I think I'm answering the question. Then when I read what I've written, it's nothing to do with what it says at the top of the box. So just make sure you are answering that question. Be realistic. Funders aren't daft. They'll see through things that are made up, particularly figures. If you say, right, we're going to work with 2,000 people in 6 months, very unlikely, particularly if you're working with those hard to reach groups. You have to be honest. They're hard to reach for a reason. So you might work with less numbers. As long as you can say why those numbers are what they are, then just be realistic about it. Find funding for your project. Try not to fit your project to funding. Sometimes you can chase the money a little bit and it just makes the bid harder to write and probably less successful. So look for things that really fit your project. And who can help you write your bid? Obviously, Rounders England are here to help and want to help, and they've got things on their website to do. I will just bring in something here as well called Club Matters, Sport England's club site. They do quite a little bit around supporting clubs be ready for bidding and things like that. So that's always worth a look at as well. Thank you.
Okay. So. Oh, you need to unmute, Janet.
To myself, I thought I'll unmute myself, and then it went at me, which is quite apt really about what I'm about to say about the experiences that I've had. So my role in Burnley is been involved in setting up a club. And then from the club has then set up leagues in Burnley, and we've been sustained now since 2013. So just really to share our experience, because I'm not an expert on funding. I think I'll take credit for being an expert in having wonderful ideas about what I want to do and how I want to go about it. But I don't have the expertise about putting things down on paper and convincing funders to part with the money. So that's where Shell came in for us. So when we started in Burnley, we had a little bit of funding from Rounders England. At the time, they were trying to promote the sport to areas where there was zero participation. We managed to hook people in Burnley. They absolutely love Rounders, and first opportunity they got, they were there. But what we needed to do was to be able to sustain ourselves after Rounders England funding had finished, and it was only a little pot of money that they could afford to give us at the time. So I approached Shell because I was lucky enough to work alongside Shell and Paul, who work for the Funding for Clubs business, and said, this is the idea I've got. How do I go about doing it? And by that time, I'd already set up the club. So again, I'm not an expert about constitutions and bank accounts and all that comes in setting up a club, but it wasn't that difficult. That's one thing I've got to tell you. If I can do it, and the people that I got working on my committee, then absolutely anybody can do that. And Rounders England are here to talk you through that step by step and to give you any assistance you need for that. So once the club was set up and we had the bank account and the constitution and everything else, and we had our aims and our values, I said to Shell, this is what we want to do. We want to be able to train people, qualify people as coaches, to buy some equipment and to be able to go out there and deliver these sessions now that we've lost the funding. So Shell went away and wrote a bid, and about 6 weeks later, we got the news that we'd been given £10,000 from Sport England, and that set Burnley Rounders Club up to where they are now. So from that, we got 30 odd umpires trained, we got 6 level 2 coaches trained. So we paid the money into Rounders England, they delivered the courses, and we were able to get qualified coaches and umpires to be able to sustain what we were trying to do, which was to run Rounders leagues every week in Burnley. And we've been doing that now since 2013, thanks to that initial funding. When that funding came to an end, we did have the monitoring and evaluation, but please do not be put off by that. It's quite simple just to keep your receipts for the money that you've spent. And if we said to them that we were aiming to get 200 ladies playing Rounders by the end of the 12 months, and we only had 150, they don't ask for any money back. We just kept in contact with them saying, this is where we're at. And, you know, you just have an open discussion with the funders. If you're not going to reach your target, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are reasons behind that. And if you've got any money left at the end of it, they invite you to say what you're going to spend it on. Keep it, but tell us what you're going to spend it on. So they do want to support you. So that's, again, it's not as daunting as it may seem. The bid writing for me was daunting. That's why I passed it on. The next thing we did is we set up another bid. And again, we were successful. Another £10,000 came our way again. We got Shell and Paul to write our bid for us. And that was to fund a junior project where we set up T-ball sessions and worked with the local school sports partnership to try and get junior Rounders and young people playing Rounders again. And the idea about that was to be able to sustain our leagues when our average age was 30 plus in our leagues, and we wanted to get younger people coming through so that we could then sustain our leagues for longer and longer because we're getting younger people coming through. Again, another successful bid. We struck the numbers, we did the monitoring and evaluation, and it was simple to do. Wasn't daunting at all. Delivering the projects is just writing the bits that I found daunting. And since then, we've gone on. We did a project during COVID where this girl Cam gave us another £10,000, and we delivered online content. We encouraged them to go out walking. So we set up step challenges where they did selfies with a different thing each week. So it was a selfie with a river or a selfie with a farm animal, different things like that. That kept it amusing, it kept people engaged, and it kept people fit and active. And that's what we asked for the money for. And again, we delivered on that. When Return to Play money came out, we asked for another £10,000 again. Michelle and Paul wrote the bid for us, and we got £10,000 to buy portable floodlights. So that meant that although we couldn't play indoors, we could set up rounders pitches anywhere we wanted, as long as we had a big enough space. We'd pop our floodlights up and away we went. So they gave us that £10,000. Now we've still got those floodlights, and we're sustaining those floodlights. We still use them, but we also hire them out to other sports. So, for example, Rounders Club have hired their floodlights out to a local golf club so that they could run 2 night golf events. So that's bringing income in for the Rounders Club. So we're sustaining our club using the equipment that we've got through funding bids as well. This Girl Can sponsor funded us another £10,000 where we set up a walking project where we took a group of ladies up Mount Snowdon to raise money for charity. So they put the money back into funding free swimming lessons for children in Burnley. And they're due to go up Ben Nevis this year. Again, that's all come through the This Girl Can campaign to get people fit and active again. And the last one I want to talk about is the one that Michelle's spoken about, which is the Jubilee Fund. Now, this is one that we want to do. We want to deliver festivals this year because it's this big platinum year for the Queen, and we want to embrace the festivals. And we've partnered up, and we've told Sport England that we want to partner up with Rounders England. So for every festival that we deliver in Burnley, we want to bring Rounders England to the festival and to deliver a talent day for us. So there'll be quality coaching that we can offer for a subsidised price to the people in Burnley. So rather than paying the £20 or whatever it is, we'll subsidise it through the funding. We'll be able to get people onto quality coaching sessions. And then at the end of it, there'll be a festival for the Motor Road Play Rounders, where we'll include sideshows for families to get involved and a DJ at the event. So it's just an upbeat, fun day where we'll provide teas, coffees, hot drinks, cold drinks to everybody. And the funding we're asking for will cover the entire cost of these festivals, and it'll link us even closer with Rounders England, which is ideally what we want all the clubs to be doing, because there's such an array of on offer from Rounders England that can come back in through the funding, and it doesn't cost us anything, but what we get from it is immense. It's kept us going now for, like I said, 9 years. And like I said, Shell and Paul are the ones that we are so thankful for. So I'm so glad that Shell's come on this call today. And again, you'll find their numbers in the comment box if you wanted to use them. But you can do this on your own as well. Let's just say that. I couldn't do it because I don't have the time and don't have the desire or the savvy to be able to start putting these bids together. But it absolutely can be done, and there is help from Rounders England. There's all sorts on the Rounders England website that will help you do that. But we've got choices. If we don't have the time, we've got companies that do and will help us to do that. So the money's there. So please, what we want to ask now is if any of you guys have applied for funding. Have you been successful in applying for funding? Are there different pots that we're not aware of? Do you have any top tips? And you know, just anything that you can share now from your local leagues, clubs, or projects that you've been involved in.
So for Batgirls, when you were saying you have great ideas, but you know, no experience in applying for fundings, etc., we can totally relate to that. So we've got great ideas, so many projects that we want to do. We definitely need the money. Everybody in the club, in our club, works full time as well. So it's revolving around volunteer hours. So unfortunately, we've not actually applied for funding before. We have tapped into local businesses, ringing around, asking them if they could help sponsor a league or sponsor buying equipment, etc. But that's the max we've done. We've not got to the point where we've applied, put in a proper application for funding. And it's not like we don't have the skill within the club. We've got the skill for it, just not the time at all for it.
Exactly. That's the exact same situation we were in Burnley. We've got plenty of skills and ideas, etc., etc. It's just the time. It's you know, it can be consuming, but you know, it's definitely there for people to tap into if people want that.
Mm-hmm.
Spen Valley applied for funding from Sport England. So we're in the process of obviously finalising that, showing what we spent as money and things like that on. Not sorry, Spen Valley, for the league itself, for the West Yorkshire Rounders League. That's who we applied from it from.
Is that the new Jubilee or the one from before?
It must be the one from before because it was for last season. So so it'll be coming back to that.
Yeah, and are you finding you've got all the evidence? Are you finding that the report writing's easy to do?
I think that, I mean, I'm not involved in that side of it. I've just been asked to come on and take notes for the committee. But there's people who are more clued up than I am on that, put it that way. But yeah, I think some of the stuff we've still got money left, but it's showing what we spend it on. But like you said, don't worry about if you've not spent it all, as long as you can justify why. So I think that was our concern. We haven't, because we haven't been able due to COVID or due to weather or things like that. So I think that was a question we was a little bit unsure of.
Yeah, I think when we did one, we had a year to spend it, and I was really stressed thinking, well, we put down funding for courses and we weren't able to go on the courses, so it was the money wasn't spent, and they just extended that and said, right, 3 months, report back in 3 months. So it did just extend, and then I was quite surprised because when I put in, I hadn't spent, it said something like you've spent 85% of what was given, and they actually said it's now closed, and I'm like, yes. I thought I'd have to do it again to spend that last few pounds, but they didn't. They just closed it eventually, but they did expect like updates until we'd finished, I suppose, the process.
Oh, that's good to know. It's good to know that, because we are using it and we have used it on a lot of the stuff, but it's just we have got some left, obviously, due to not being able to use it. So it was a bit of, right, okay, what do we do? So I will take that back to them.
Yeah, because and my next slide, this sort of gives you a little bit of an example. So excuse my singing, but 4 safeguarding officers, 3 prelim umpires, 2 assistant coaches, and 1 level 2 head coach is £839. That is an example of the prices on our website. We are willing and will support you in getting costs together. If you say, right, give me a workforce package, I'm happy to put one together with a range of all kinds of things. First aiders as well. You could have intermediate umpires if you so wished, talent days, venue hire, tournament costs, like Janet says. You can put a package together, and as long as that's meeting your aims of, I'm going for employment, I want skilled workforce, I want people to have access, because this all links to employability, building confidence and that kind of thing, and that was approved from Sport England last year. So we did a massive recruitment drive. Another example is 4 wooden bases, 3 kinds of bats, 2 sets of match balls, and support to get low income families playing for free. So you could put in, like Michelle said, shopping basket, go to Rounders England shop, add everything that you need, including hoops and ropes and whatever you want, and then just putting that total out there with a screenshot and taking that to Sport England. What I would say is they will say yes or no to certain things. So when I put in my equipment bid last year, I put in bibs, hoodies, t-shirts. I thought I'd go for the lot, and they went, no, we're not giving you bibs. No, you can buy your own hoodies, but yes, we'll get you kit. And so they did sort of say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So even though I put in a giant, massive shopping list, they sort of said, you can get your own rebound nets, you can get your own hoops and things like that. But they did give me the essentials. Now, I don't know, Michelle, if you want to be cheeky and overdo everything, or do you just want to play it safe? What's your advice?
My advice would be to go over rather than under. So if it's £10,000 available, as long as you're not being silly and just asking for random stuff, then go for the top bit. What I probably should have said it before, the personal equipment side of thing is always a grey area for funders. Particularly Sport England, they do not want to fund personal kit because obviously they're just giving an individual, they see it's giving an individual a t-shirt, and that doesn't obviously contribute to their outcomes. So, but if forever you add some bank kit that people could come along and use, but it's the club's ownership, then that's a different matter. Sometimes it's just how you word things.
Yeah,
But
we put in a bid for our not our training top, but our league uniform, if you like, and Calderdale Council, which is our local borough council, they said, yep, we will give you the money, but I had to sign saying they were not to be personalised, they were to remain the property of the club, and I can't remember what the other, basically there was, and I had to if I produced any more equipment within 3 years, I also had to put funded by Calderdale Council on. So for 3 years we've sort of had to go, right, Calderdale Council is going to have to be named on our league kit. It actually worked out probably more expensive than I thought, because we got so many members, I had to produce more t-shirts, and because I needed to get their name on the kit, that did actually come at quite a cost. But it's something for you to think about. Kit can't be personalised, it must be, you know, owned by the club, used for the club, and returned back to the club. And just be careful if you do promise any plumber, builder's merchant, if you say you're going to brand everything with their logo on, just think about that, what that cost is to you. Because if it's £2 to get on every hat, t-shirt and hoodie, and they've only give you a few £100, it's not going to be worth it while in the long term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is what we were seeing, that people would come to us with about, we're giving you £100 or £200 and ask to have their logo on our t-shirts. And I was just thinking it's going to cost, you know, at least half of that to get all your logos on the t-shirt. So we were having to say no to funding because of the ask that they were giving.
Yeah,
that we need on. So what we do say things like we'll tag you on social media, etc. But unless it's a large pot of funding, to have their logos on all the t-shirts just doesn't work out.
yeah, I totally agree. Bit of a top tip before you sign up to anything like that. So has anybody got any questions or anything they'd like to ask? Has anything come up in the chat, Rianne?
I was just going to ask about, I was just going to ask, you know how you said the funding period is, for example, a year, and you don't, if you haven't spent the money, they're not very strict about that, as long as you've got a plan for forecast to say when it's going to be spent and what it's going to be spent on. Is that with all of the funders, or is that limited to, say, Sports England, for example? Because in my experience, any funding bodies, so for example through my day job, have been quite strict about this, or you have to return the money.
I think with COVID,
Yeah.
I think it's been a genuine excuse. I don't think they've been
Yeah.
able to ask anybody to be able to spend it. Michelle, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right there. With COVID, people have been a bit more lenient. Some funders will be more specific, simply because they'll have so much money to spend within their financial year. So obviously they've allocated that in that year, and if it's not spent, they will maybe ask for it back. But what I would say is, if you've got a project that's 12 months, within 6 months, you should have a pretty good idea of whether you're going to spend your money in time. And if you're not, that's the time to contact them. Or and
Okay.
if they say, no, we need it spending, then you've still got 6 months to try and get it spent.
Right.
Just have that conversation. Most funders are a lot more open these days to conversations around changing things if they're not working, or just editing things slightly.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would reiterate that. I think before COVID, there was definitely that expectation that if you don't spend it, the funding is returned. So it is worth being mindful of that, that if you're not on track to spend it, just to keep them updated. It's that dialogue that Michelle was talking about, that the more dialogue you have with them, the better, isn't it?
Yeah. And sometimes it's not just COVID that gets in the way. It's obviously the people that the members of the club are, you know, mums, wives, they've got a lot of commitment, they're working, etc. So they might not be able to commit to going on the course, for example, this year, but they would do it next year. But if that funding's then taken away, then it's a bit difficult to send them the following year. And in such cases, would it be possible to pay Rounders England for the course, but do it for the coming year as opposed to the one that we're in? Would that be a possibility?
Rianne, could we do credit notes? Gift cards?
Yeah, I'm not sure what David, our operations director, would say about that. But yeah, I mean, we can, what we want to ensure is that we have more people playing round us through these funding bids. And, you know, we want to support you in any way possible. So we're always very flexible to different approaches. One thing I wanted to kind of ask people was, we've spoken about active partnerships, and some of you are kind of based within a very similar kind of active partnership area, but have any of you worked with your local active partnership to access any funding through COVID, whether it's been Tackling Inequalities Fund, or there's going to be a new one coming out called Together Fund, which I think would fit really well with what Rounders and Playing Rounders achieves. Have any of you worked with your active partnerships?
No. So when you mean active partnership, what do you mean by that?
It'd be Yorkshire Sport or Northants Sport. They've all got different names.
Okay.
But if you haven't, we've got their details, and we could work with you and put you in touch with the right people in those active partnerships. So if that is something that you would want to do, if you just pop a yes in the chat, and we can do some follow-up with those active partnerships too.
So when we started our journey, it was through Ready Steady Active. So I know Rashida did apply, ask us to apply for Yorkshire Sport funding to help subsidise some of the coaching cost. So we got, I think, a bursary, a coaching bursary for £100, which helped us go on the course.
Yeah, that's it. They're very good at kind of helping support kickstart activity, or at the moment that it's still very much that COVID recovery. So if you're struggling to find facilities that you would like to use, or you need to do some more marketing to bring back players or bring back more teams, they're more than happy to support you in that. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily have to be all that new activity. If you as a league or a club or a team are struggling to bring players back from COVID, they're happy to help you still on that recovery road.
And just a little top tip from me, doesn't always work, but if you've spent that time writing a bid about what you're going to do, what you'd like to achieve, who you're going to help with your project, and you've done all that work, I would recommend that you email that to some of your local businesses, especially this time of year when it's coming to end of budget. They've got certain pots of money to spend, which they do allocate for ethical reasons, community projects, and it's all on a need to know basis. You've got to ask to find out. And what I would do personally is make connections with people on LinkedIn, send marketing team your email. If you've already done that, it's just a matter of sending it to them businesses and just seeing if you get a response. Sometimes they'll match funds, so if you can raise so much money that they'll support, or sometimes it's just a bit of a gift. I know Halifax do it, Lloyds Bank. I've had funding from Hermes before. If you catch them at the right time with something that really does help the community in which they operate, that there is always money out there. That's obviously not something you're going to find advertised. That's something you're just going to have to, I suppose, send out a few emails and just expect a few rejections. But sometimes it works, and it has worked for me in the past.
That's really useful to know.
If you've done
I was just I was just going to ask another question. With these funding applications, do you have to show what kind of on the sustainability angle, do you have to show what money's coming in and how we're using that? And if so, can you use things like volunteer time to show that this is a cost that has come in? Because otherwise, if we were paying for the coach to deliver the session, if we were paying for people to be doing the admin work, that volunteer hour is feeding into the club.
On the new Platinum Jubilee grant, it does on the drop down box, it does say coach funding. So I'm
Okay.
wondering if you could put in for funding to pay coach expenses.
Just-
Would that be
Sorry,
something that
that
would?
we've got a bid in for the platinum, and we've put coach fees down.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've trained through funding, we've trained coaches and we've trained umpires, and those coaches and umpires now get paid to work in our delivery. So we might set up a just play session. We'll pay a coach the hourly fee to go down and deliver that session for us for that hour. We charge maybe a couple of quid per player to come back in, and then that sustains the club because it brings an income into the club to keep them going. But on the Jubilee Fund, we've put down volunteer hours, £2,000 worth of volunteer hours.
Yeah.
Is
Okay.
our contribution from our club to the overall project. You know, that we're going to have volunteers helping at the festival days. We're going to have volunteers helping at the Just Play sessions. So yes, you can, although I think we've said our bid is around about 11,900 and we're asking for 9,900 of that. And our contributions, the volunteer hours most definitely can be put down as a contribution.
Thank you.
Are there, sorry.
Are there any other questions or top tips or anything you'd like to ask or share?
I think there is one more question from me. Sorry, I seem to be taking the floor with the questions. So in terms of the help that Rounders England can provide, is any of that actually writing the application or anything, or would that really be down to us to do? Because sometimes that is the biggest job, you know, writing that application, completing that.
Yeah, we're a bit the same, Stick. So we couldn't kind of give the dedicated time to write that bid. We could share with you some examples of successful bids to help you on that road. And obviously, you know, sending in final bids for us to check through and look through, you know, we're more than happy to do that. Or you can utilise Michelle's expertise if that's the route you wanted to go down. But definitely share with us if you're thinking of submitting a bid, and we'll help you as much as we can. But we wouldn't be able to kind of sustain internally writing bids for different groups.
Yeah, that completely makes sense, but I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, if you ask, you get. I was just wondering if people would kind of share what they were thinking of applying for, or if they wanted to check what they were thinking of applying for is something that we think would get funding.
We're taking part in the upcoming talent day in June that's just been organised. We're wondering if we might get some funding for the, you know, individuals that want to go, because it's £20 a head. I'm just wondering if that's a possibility to encourage players to go. I think some would pay it anyway, but I think definitely it would have, you know, much better you know, take up of it.
Yeah, I think, Georgie, yours would be a really similar bid to the one that Janet has submitted. So Janet's running a very similar event to what you've got at Old Grammarians. So I think it would be worth us kind of connecting you both together to see how we can complement each other and see if there's anything that you want to do as a league. Because I know you were saying before that some of your numbers have dropped, and could we potentially use some of this funding to help you increase those numbers as well? I definitely think you as a league and a club, we could support.
Right. We've got 2 new teams this year, so we've got 9 teams on board.
Oh, good.
This year, so it's really suddenly improved.
Yeah, great.
And so I was thinking of supporting the new teams as well with equipment, and you know, I was also thinking of more festivals and applying for things like gazebos. I don't know I just don't know what you can and can't.
Yeah,
Or-
well, honestly, use this forum, ask us, and kind of Janet and Michelle will be able to tell you, you know, what they've been successful for. So,
Okay.
Yeah, we've definitely in our current bid and in previous bids, we've managed to get funding to run festivals, to set up sessions to aimed at acquiring new players. We've had equipment budgets where we have a bank of equipment that we loan out to new teams so that they can set themselves up in their own practice sessions. Training, we've got everything. And to have a gazebo, absolutely, I'd put that in, because you'll need that for your festivals, for your sort of HQ for your festivals.
Yeah.
So definitely, I would put that down. That can go down in your equipment, you know,
Okay.
funding equipment.
Okay, thank you.
I know that I've been involved as well with kind of like music systems and things that have been successful, including in a bid, if that's something that you wanted to kind of, I don't know whether that's still allowed, Michelle, but I know that that's something that we've had before, just to kind of make the sessions more fun and engaging. So anything like that you were thinking of.
And they can always say no. They can say yes to that bit, no to that, and then at least you've got some of the funding that you needed. So it's always worth adding it on, I'd say.
I think it all comes back round to making sure whatever you're asking for, you can justify meets the outcomes of whatever they want. So if you're looking to get people active and a music system helps that, then as long as you tell that story, then you're in with a chance of getting the funding. Similar with the gazebos, yeah, you can put it down as your equipment, but sometimes it's better to put it down as marketing. So you're going to get a branded one. So it does like a dual purpose. So that obviously helps with that side of your project as well. So it is, as long as it is justifiable, then like Nick says, put it in, because they can say no, they don't like that bit, and they will do sometimes. And just something else that I probably haven't mentioned, and I know Nick's talked around, obviously you have got to report on what's gone on and how many people you've engaged with, etc. But there is a definite culture change at the minute, particularly from Sport England, around learning. And not only learning what's working, but what's not working. So if you've done something that really hasn't worked and you thought it might, that is still really important to report back. So don't be afraid to say, we really thought this was going to engage lots and lots of people, but in fact it didn't. And when we spoke to people, this is the reason why. So just bear that in mind as well. If you are successful, just be very honest in your reporting. They're not going to say, well, it didn't work, we'll have your money back. But they will want to know why it didn't work. And that's just as important as the successes in some ways.
Okay.
Just one final thing from me, because we didn't have the sort of savvy and know-how of how to write our bids, and at that time, Rounders England didn't have the infrastructure to help support the bid writing. When we went to Shell, Shell's company do charge a commission for their services to us of 10%. And that was one of the reasons why we carried on charging for new teams to sort of £2 a session, all that sort of stuff, because then that gave us the income that we knew we were going to spend next time we asked the bid to write, for them to write a bid for us. So that's just something to bear in mind.
Please do let us know if any of you intend on writing a bid, because we will support you, and we would love, you know, sometimes Sport England will come to us and, you know, say there's been this funding application made, are you in support of it as a governing body? And, you know, if we've had that dialogue with you, you know, obviously straight away we can say, yes, this is the reason why they're applying for it, is part of the bigger picture. So please do keep us in the loop with funding, so we can then support you as best we can.
Are there any other questions?
How do we contact Michelle to support us with if we decide we want her to do it for us?
I think
I've just popped it in the chat for you.
Yeah. Oh. Okay.
So if you can get that, and we can send it out with, we'll send everybody who's on tonight this presentation, as well as contacts too.
I think just to reiterate what Rhiannon was saying there, if you do happen to go down Michelle's line, we still at Rounders England want to know about these funding bids that you're putting in, because we still want to be able to support you and say to any of the funders, yes, we are in support of these bids, because it does link into the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just a quick clarification. So Michelle is from Funding for Clubs, is that right? Okay. And is this a paid for service then? Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to thank you all for your participation. You may hang around for informal questions after that, but Rhiannon, if you want to stop recording.